Hi everyone, my name is Laura and today I'll be talking about the human hippocampus. So in this tutorial I'll be focusing only on whole hippocampal anatomy, but I'll record a tutorial on hippocampal subfields in the future. So before I get started, I just want to point you to three important references. This book by Duvernois, this chapter by Ricardo Insausti and David Emerald, and this paper by Songlin Ding and Gary Van Hoosen. So before I go to the MR images, I just want to go quickly over the terminology that I'll be discussing in this tutorial. So there's hippocampal head, body and tail, digitations, the dark band, also called stratum radiatum lacunosum moleculare or SRLM, hippocampal sulcus, alveus, angus, and fimbria. These are things we'll be discussing today. So I'll be showing you three images. A high-resolution post-mortem image, a high-resolution in vivo T1 weighted image, T2 weighted image, and a lower-resolution in vivo T1 weighted image. So before I go to the post-mortem image, I just want to point out the location of the hippocampus on this coronal whole brain image. And you can see the hippocampus here and here in both hemispheres. It's located in the medial side of the temporal lobe. So here, medial side of the temporal lobe. So in this image, this is a postmortem image which is proton density weighted, which means that the white matter is the dark appearing in the middle and the gray matter is lighter. And I went here to the most anterior tip of the hippocampus in red here, which is located inferiorly to the amygdala and superiorly to the entorhinal cortex here. And sometimes, although dependent on the amount of atrophy a person may have, you can also see the temporal horn of the lateral ventricle. So the anterior portion of the hippocampus is generally called hippocampal head, which starts at the anterior tip, and I'll show you later what the posterior end of the hippocampal head is. So I'm just going to go in a posterior direction, and what you can see here appearing is the hippocampus is becoming bigger, the amygdala is becoming slightly smaller, and you can see a number of things happening. For example, there's some bumps here which are called digitations. What I want to point out about these is that these are actually quite variable between subjects, but also between hemispheres. And I think they're normally between 2 and 5. They're normally between 2 and 5 digitations in the hippocampal head. Another thing that you can see is that in the middle of the hippocampus there's this dark white matter showing. So it's dark appearing, which is the dark band of the hippocampus. So it's one of the layers of both this side and this side. So there are two layers merged together, and it's called the stratum radiatum lacunosum moleculare. And right in the middle of it is the hippocampal sulcus, although oftentimes in the hippocampus sulcus is completely merged. So the molecular layers are merged, so you don't really see the vestigial sulcus anymore. So that's why it's called vestigial hippocampal sulcus. So if we're going a little bit further posterior, what you can see is that the hippocampus is starting to merge with the entorhinal cortex. You can see here, and the digitations are becoming more pronounced. The amygdala is becoming a little bit smaller. What you can see here is a little portion of the hippocampal sulcus that is actually clear right here. So going a little bit further, posteriorly. Now the hippocampus is completely merged with the entorhinal cortex, as you can see here. And it also is now incorporating this superior part, which is called uncal region or uncus. And I have to be honest with you, you can't really see this on MRI, so I'm not 100% sure how far up the hippocampus goes in this particular specimen and how far below here. So I've just made an approximation of this. And you can also see that these digitations are becoming more pronounced, and maybe this is another one, and another one here might be coming up. So going in further in a posterior direction, what you can see happening here is that this digitation is starting to widen, and there's other gray matter appearing in the middle, which is the dentate gyrus. And if we're going in a further posterior direction, you can see that this region is becoming bigger, and actually the digitations are becoming more shallow. And again, this is the uncal region. Going further posterior, you can see more of this. And then going further posterior, you can see that this uncal region is starting to separate from this lateral portion of the hippocampus. And then this continues, the uncal region is becoming smaller until here it's very small, and then in the next slice it disappears. So this would be the most posterior end of the hippocampus, and this would be the most anterior slice of the middle region of the hippocampus, which is often called hippocampal body. So before I go into the hippocampal body, I just want to point out this black area here, which is where the hippocampal sulcus is. So these are sometimes called hippocampal sulcal cavities or cysts. And this is actually a pretty normal appearing feature of the hippocampus. I think it occurs in young age. As far as I know, I don't think it's related to disease or aging. So going into the hippocampal body, this is characterized by what people call the two interlocking C's. I want to show those to you. You can probably see this dark appearing band here. And you see a lighter region here. So one of the C's is here. And the other one is in mirror, and it's right here. So those are the interlocking C's, and that is kind of the shape that you generally see in the hippocampal body. Some other things that I want to point out is this dark appearing layer at the outside, which is called the alveus, and this, where it comes together, also dark appearing white matter, is the fimbria. And the alveus was actually already present in previous slices, so it's actually present all the way through the length of the hippocampus. So again, I'm not sure on the medial end where the hippocampus stops, so this is just an arbitrary boundary that I made just for now. And going in a posterior direction, you can continue to see these two C shapes. And here's actually another sulcal cavity or cyst. Going further posterior, what you start to see at some point is some more digitations. That's pretty common. And generally we're getting now in a more posterior region of the hippocampus, which is called a hippocampal till. It's hard to say where exactly that starts, and we generally just arbitrary cutoffs based on landmarks, which unfortunately are not visible in the post-mortem MRI. So what you do see is, as you can see here, these bumps. I think these are generally called dentations in the more posterior end of the hippocampus. And you can see that this middle portion is starting to protrude in a medial direction. Going further posterior, you see this region extending, and you see some digitations. I'll show the overlay. Then going further, you can see that more, and actually the inner shape is becoming a little bit more complicated, so you don't really see the two C's anymore, and so forth until it disappears. And I have to say actually that in this particular sample it's hard for me to determine where the actual posterior end of the hippocampal till is. And I have to also say that the hippocampal till can appear in different shapes, so it doesn't always look like this. So we'll see another example in the in vivo images. So before I go on to the in vivo images though, I just want to show you the sagittal plane of the hippocampus. So it's a long stretched, it's a long stretched region, and I think it's about 4 centimeters long. And what you see here is this region is the hippocampal head, then this middle portion hippocampal body, and then this is the hippocampal tail. And then finally I want to show you the 3D shape of the hippocampus, where again this is the hippocampal head, this mid portion is the body, and then this final version is the hippocampal tail. So then I want to move on to the 7 Tesla in vivo image. And this is a T2 weighted image, so again that means that the gray matter is a light grayish color and the white matter is this darker appearing color. So I'm going to go again in an anterior direction, and because of the resolution it's a little bit more complicated to see, but this gray matter is the anterior tip of the hippocampus, so the hippocampal head. And then you see a little bit of the temporal horn of the lateral ventricle, the amygdala, and the entorhinal cortex. So going in a posterior direction, you see again digitations appearing, the amygdala is getting a little bit smaller, and again similar to what you saw in post-mortem MRI, you see a dark band on the outside, the alveus. You see some lighter appearing voxels here, which is the hippocampal sulcus, and you can see some darker appearing voxels here, which is again the dark band or SRLM. And another thing that you see is that it's becoming again merged with the entorhinal cortex, and then this portion is generally, at least partly, considered to be a part of the hippocampus, although I'm not 100% sure how far up it goes. So going in a posterior direction, you can see additional digitations appear. You can see the amygdala getting smaller. And then you see, as I've pointed out before, that between those digitations you see another portion of the gray matter appear, which is the dentate gyrus. And when you go in a posterior direction, the dentate gyrus is becoming bigger. And the digitations are becoming more shallow. And then going in a more posterior direction, the medial portion, which is the uncus, is becoming separated from this lateral portion, and then it disappears. So this would be the last slice with the uncus, so this would be the posterior end of the hippocampal head, and then the next slice will be the hippocampal body. So again, the outside you have the alveus, here you have the SRLM. This is another which appears bright here because the cerebral spinal fluid appears bright in T2 weighted images. This is a cyst or a hippocampal sulcal cavity. And what you see here, it's a little harder to see than in the post-mortem image. But that would be the vibria. And again, what you maybe see is the dark band curving inwards here. So again, we're looking for the C, the two interlocking C's. So this is one, and this is the other. So this is the typical hippocampal body shape. So if we're going in a posterior direction, we continue to see this two C's. And then going further posterior, you can continue to see those two C's, although it is a little bit harder to observe on these lower resolution in vivo images. And then at some point we're in the hippocampal tail, so more posterior region. You can see in this case again that this middle portion, the dentate gyrus, is going in, extending in that direction much more so in this slice, and you see some digitations here. and then it is changing a little bit in shape, and then it becomes separated from this medial part. So this would be the last hippocampal tail slice. So this is actually a little bit different from what we saw before. And I want to show you again where the tail ends in this location, so more in this location. So I've seen both of these. They're pretty common. Just want you to be aware that sometimes the hippocampal tail ends in the medial location and sometimes in the lateral location. So again, if we look at this in the sagittal plane, unfortunately we don't have a very high resolution. You can see here the long stretch shape and the digitations, even though the slices are a little bit thicker. And again, this is the hippocampal head, this is the hippocampal body, and that's the hippocampal tail. And then looking in 3D, you see a similar shape as we've seen before. So now I want to end with the hippocampus in a T1 weighted image. You can see here, and you can already see that things look much more complicated or much less clear in the T1 weighted image. So I'm going in the anterior direction, and it's pretty hard to see, but this is the start of the hippocampus. So the anterior tip of the hippocampus, which is inferior to the amygdala, superior to the entorhinal cortex, and you see a little bit of the temporal horn of the lateral ventricle. So going in a posterior direction, you can see a little bit of these digitations, but it's hard to see anything inside the hippocampus. And I should point out the T1 weighted images have a different contrast where the white matter is lighter and the gray matter is grayish. So the hippocampus is now darker than the white matter. So going further in the posterior direction, you can see a little bit of the digitations, but internally we don't see a lot. Maybe some darker voxels, which is now the contrast of the cerebral spinal fluid. So this could be maybe hippocampal sulcus. You see the amygdala becoming smaller here. And again, you see the hippocampus extending to this portion here, which we called uncus. So going in a posterior direction, again, this is the uncal region. And perhaps some of these darker voxels indicate the hippocampal sulcus. And then going further posterior, the hippocampal or the uncal region is becoming separated from the lateral portion of the hippocampus until it disappears. And again, this would be the most posterior hippocampal head slice, and this would be the most anterior hippocampal body slice. And I want to point out that I think the end of the uncus is, I think, the most commonly used way to differentiate between hippocampal head and body. I'm actually not aware of any other definition of these two regions. So what you see now in the hippocampal body is, I mean, maybe in terms of shape you can see something similar as we saw on the T1 weighted images you can see here, although there's much less contrast, so it's a little bit harder to see. You do see something maybe bright sticking out here, and that would be the fimbria. So going in a posterior direction, you can continue to see kind of the shape, where if we had more resolution, maybe this would be one of the C's, and this would be the other one of the C's, although it's very unclear, of course. I do want to point out this brighter region on the outside, which I think is probably going to be alveus, but that looks bright in these type of images. Going further posterior, you can see the shape of the hippocampus changing. It's not super clear, but you don't see the typical body shape anymore. I don't really see a lot of digitations here, but you do see clearly a different shape. which is then becoming smaller. And in this case, it does end more in the medial location of the hippocampus. So I think going back to the hippocampal body, I think what is similar to what you see on the higher resolution images is this outline, which is similar on, for example, the T2 weighted image. So that would also be an outline kind of like this. I'm doing it a little bit quickly now. So then I want to go again to the sagittal plane. Again, you see a long striped figure, but there's much less detail available now. You don't really see a lot of digitations here, maybe 2 here. And then in 3D, you do see kind of a similar figure where this is hippocampal head, the mid portion is hippocampal body, and this is hippocampal tail. So I want to wrap up and go over these regions again. So I want to stick with the post-mortem because you can see the hippocampus the best. So in the hippocampal head, you start with a small portion of the hippocampus inferior to the amygdala and superior to the entorhinal cortex, which soon starts to have these digitations and this dark band in the middle. Then going further posterior, you get more pronounced digitations and this gray matter, the dentate gyrus appearing in the middle. And then this uncal region is probably for the most part also part of the hippocampus. And going further posterior, you can see that these digitations have become more shallow and the mid portion of the gyrus has become bigger. And then this uncal region separates from the lateral portion of the hippocampus, which would be the end of the hippocampal head. And in the hippocampal body, you have this very typical shape where you have 2 C's, one here and one interlocking C's and one here. And then in the hippocampal tail, I think generally the shape changes a little bit. You start to see a little bit of these digitations. And this medial portion is starting to extend in this direction. And excuse me. And this is one of the ways the hippocampal tail can look like in the most posterior part. So I hope this was helpful, and I want to thank you for listening.